In this Blender tutorial for Trainz, we're going to teach you how to set up your materials correctly, create some LODs, export the meshes into a folder, set up that folder correctly to be a Trainz asset, and then we'll drop that folder into Trainz Content Manager to install it and preview it in game. So first off, we want to make sure that our materials are set up correctly. This tutorial itself won't teach you how to model or create textures and apply those to UVs on your model. You will want to Google that and see some Blender tutorials that already exist out there to follow along and learn how to use Blender itself. But this will teach you how to export your model and get it into Trainz. Firstly, we have materials for this particular model. There's three materials. One is the bark on the trunk of the tree, and that is PBR metal, and that is an opaque material, not a transparent material, or doesn't contain transparency. Then there's the branches. That is a transparent material, or contains transparency, and that is PBR metal masked. And then there's the leaves themselves, which also contains transparency. So if we go to shading up the top here in the workspace, we can see that with our materials here, we have set them up as bark, and we have the textures, bark, a parameters texture, and a normal texture, and each one of these are connected through up to the PSDF shader. The normal goes through a normal map, and it's connected up to the normal tab, and the parameters goes to the roughness, and the albedo goes to the base color. And that's the same for all our materials, just obviously different textures. So once they're all set up like so, that's all you need to do for your materials. Obviously you need the .m.pbr metal, and then if you're using transparency, it'll need to be PBR metal masked. There's other materials like m.clutter and several other materials on the Trainz wiki. If you type in Trainz PBR material in Google, you'll come up with a wiki, and it will show you which different materials you can use for what things on your mesh. So go back to layout. When we've got our materials set up, we will then look to generate the LODs for this particular asset. We can see down here it's 19,000 faces. You can turn those stats on if you go to Edit, Preferences, Interface, Status Bar, and then enable them via the Scene Stats. We can then select our mesh, and we will install the first plugin that's going to make our life a little bit easier. We go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and this Install button here. After you've downloaded the plugins and put them in a directory, you can hit the Install button, and under our plugins here, we will find the first plugin, which is Trainz LODz Blender plugin. Get the directory, paste it in, double click on the Trainz LODz Blender plugin, and that will search on that one that's just installed, and you can enable it. When you enable it, you won't see anything happen in the UI until you click this little sidebar menu over here and bring it out, and that's where the LODs menu is actually found. You can drag that away if you don't want it, or you can click that to bring it back out again. So we'll close that down for now. Now this Trainz LODz setting allows you to set the number of LODs you want. The decimation ratio is how many polygons will be reduced each time your next LOD happens. And right now it's set to 50%. The lineup offset is the offset per LOD, and we'll keep that at 0. it will apply any modifiers you have to your LOD. It will add the LOD 0n to the name of the mesh. So LOD 0n 0, 1, 2, 3 will be the number of the LODs. And we want this because this is important for one of our other plugins. It looks for this particular suffix in the file name when we export them to help us create the Trainz asset. The make collections is on as well, so it will group them for us. And provided that they're all ticked and you've set your preferences up here, we can go ahead and click the Create LODs button. So that's now gone through and made a collection called Tree Mesh, and it's made 5 new LODs, including the existing LOD that was there before, the highest LOD. So if we have a look at those in the status bar, once all the LODs have been generated, we can go into edit mode for each of the meshes and see how many triangles each of them have. So the top LOD still has 19,000 triangles. The next LOD down has 9,000. Next LOD's 4,000. Next LOD's 2,500. The following one is 1,000. And this LOD is 600. Now that the LODs have been generated, we can fix the name up. The plugin that we'll use at a later date will look for words by determining where the capital letters are at the start of each of the words. So we want tree to have a capital letter, we want mesh to have a capital letter, and we'll get rid of those spaces. So we can do this by going to edit and batch rename, and we can clean it up by going find and replace our space with nothing, and then we'll go to batch rename again, and we will capitalize everything. So change the case to title case, and then we also want to get rid of those capital N's at the end and make them a lowercase. And in this case, there's only one N in each of them, and that's what we want it to look like. It's worth noting that the LOD 0n, LOD 1n, LOD 2n, and so on is used in a plugin later on to determine what the LOD levels are. LOD 0, LOD 1, LOD 2 is obviously self-explanatory, but the N stands for normal mesh, as in it's the original. It'll be used as the base version, but you can put an S in the place of an N, and that'll be for snow meshes, for things that are above the snow line, and we can explain that later in another tutorial when we make something with seasonal. But for now, LOD 0n, LOD 01, LOD 02, LOD 2n, sorry, LOD 3n is where we want to be. So that's our LODs generated, and the naming convention has been reworked, and so now it's time to actually export these into a folder. Right now our folder looks like this. It has a thumbnail which is blank, which we'll replace once we get our asset into Trainz and take a screenshot of it in Trainz. But we've also got a bunch of textures that have been attached to these materials, and that's all that exists in our current asset at the moment. We're going to export those mesh files into this folder. How we do that is we can use another plugin. We go to Edit, Preferences, and we go to Install. We go to Blender Super Batch Export Plugin. It searches for it already for us, and we just enable that. And when we enable it, you'll see there's a little menu item that shows up, and that's the one we're going to use. So make sure you have your LODs selected, and we will batch export these out in a second. Before we do that, I know that a couple of these meshes will have loose polygons, loose vertices just floating around, and Trainz won't like that. There will be a troubleshooting video in the description of this video that goes through a few things that you might find that you need to do to get your mesh, do a Trainz assets or mesh in particular, to not get validation errors when you import them into Trainz. So I know what's going to happen at the moment, so I'll run a clean over these meshes, and you should do the same as well, but that will be outlined in a troubleshooting video that is in the link below that you can look at. So now it's time to export the LODs that we've made into the Trainz asset folder. So select all the LODs, go up into the batch export, and we want to select the folder where we're going to export these LODs to. Copy and paste the location from Windows Explorer, and that's now set the folder to be that one. We don't want a prefix or a suffix. We want the export to be FBX. We want the mode to be objects. We want to go with selected because we've selected just those ones. We want it just to be mesh, and everything else can be unticked. Now, the FBX settings preset, I have one called Trainz, and that is predefined by going to export FBX, and under here you can tick all sorts of options and change them around, and once you get the options you want, which for this one we want selected objects and mesh, we want the scale to be 1, we want the applied settings to be FBX all, forward is Y up, up is Z up, apply unit is ticked, use space transforms ticked, and the rest should be default. You shouldn't have to touch anything else. You can save that by going with the plus and naming it something, and now you'll have a preset to always use, and you won't have to set that up again. So now we've got that selected, we're good to export. So you hit the export button or batch export, it should go off, and that should be all we need for Blender. We're finished with Blender for now. It's gone and export all our FBX files into that folder, and now we're going to use another tool that is over here. It's Trainz Content Utils. It mightn't look amazing, but it definitely will help you fast track a lot of this stuff. So grab the location where your Trainz asset is, and for now we're going to generate texture.txt files, and this application will open each of your texture files up, and it will create the correct texture.txt file. So Trainz knows how to read each of those textures in, whether they have transparency or not, whether they're normal maps, that type of thing. So copy in your path and hit preview, and it will give you a breakup of where it's going to put those files and what is going to be in those files. So you can see, just to make sure that they look correct, I know that Leaf has an alpha, so it's found that. I know that this brush normal is a normal map, and it's found it as a normal map. So you hit process once you've done that, and you'll see all these will get texture.txt files associated with them. So each one will have one above or below your texture file, and that's what you want to see. It saves you having to make them manually. Or you don't have to, you can let Trainz do it, but they may get it wrong because you might have wanted transparency in one of the files, or it may have not found it was a normal map, and so on. So once we've done that, there's another thing that we want to do, and that's generate our config file. And instead of making that manually, you can use this plugin again. It should keep the same directory that you've entered. You can go into generate config, and from here you just fill out these details, hit generate, and it'll create a config for you. Now I've got a spreadsheet with all my coords in it, so I know what has been used and what hasn't. So I'm going to use this coord for this Trainz asset. The coord version is 0, so I don't need to fill it in. It'll use 0. It'll make it a base coord without that. the mesh asset keyword is the parent keyword of if you have a library you're using where your FBX files and textures might be stored somewhere else. You can add that library keyword in there. The description will obviously be the description in the config. I know this tree is from an autumn pack, so I'm going to fill this in with autumn pack and see that be a prefix for all the assets I create with this autumn pack. I will then give the category class. FT is for a tree in Trainz. You can find all the categories under the wiki, under category class. If you type in category class and Google that with Trainz, you will find that it'll take you to the wiki here, and you can find all the categories under here. Mine being FT, and it says it there under foliage, that's a tree, so I'm going to use that one. And then we move on to mesh scale. Now this only works, it's a minimum and maximum random range percentage wise, but this only works with mesh that are 1,000 polygons or less, which is not going to help me at the moment. I'm not going to have a random rotation. I will make it cast shadows. I won't hide it in a winter. In winter, I won't hide it if it's above the snow line. And the LOD transition array, we have 6 LODs, 1 to 5 is 6 LODs, so we need to make each transition show between a certain meterage. And the range I've got so far, I'm going to go from 0 to 20 is the first LOD. That's our highest LOD. 20 to 40 is our second LOD. 40 to 70 is our third LOD. 70 to 100 is our fourth LOD. 100 to 200 is our fifth LOD. And 200 to 15,000 is our sixth LOD, because I'm going to see that tree out as far as possible, even though Trainz draw distance set in game will determine whether how far that draws out to or not. If we put FXCLT in here, it becomes a clutter asset, but we don't want to use this one as a clutter asset. It's usually just smaller assets that you can use as clutter, and we'll have another tutorial on clutter separately to that. So we won't bother doing that. That all looks good. You actually, before we hit the process button, you have the option to do ground textures, mesh, and track in here as well, but we're just doing scenery today. You can hit preview, and again, that'll give you a bit of a preview on what you can expect in this config file, and it should find all your mesh files, which it has. Each of them will have their own LOD levels, and then as we move down, there's the LOD transitions, and the rest looks fine. So we'll process that, go back into our folder on the output, and it will have the first name of your LOD. That's where your config will be. We'll copy that and we'll bring it back into the root directory where our mesh files are and our textures. And you can open this up and change it however you want. For instance, put your author in there, get rid of the license, change the description, whatever you need to do. This just sets you up with a nice base to work from. And that should be it. We'll delete our output folder. Worth knowing there's a log folder there that tells you what it's done. So if you need to search through it because you don't think it's doing something correctly, you can look through there to find out what it's doing. You get rid of the output folder, and now we can start Trainz up, open Content Manager, and we can drop this in. And if anything shows up in red, it means it's a warning. Any of the yellow you can ignore. Trainz should be happy enough. Then we can right click, open, preview asset, and there's our asset in game. So as we scroll backwards, if we get to over 20 meters, we will see that the triangle count should drop to 9,000. So that's LOD 1. We were on LOD 0, LOD 1, LOD 2 should kick in around now. It's LOD 2, LOD 3, LOD 4, and LOD 5 somewhere around here. So that's the distances that will kick in. You can obviously inspect the LODs if you want to change it up here, but you don't ever see the LODs this close, so all you want to do is make sure the transitions look fine as you're scrolling across, in and out. Again, we can go and create a new route. Find our tree, put a few around, and find that they should be working as intended. There you go. Hope you've enjoyed the video on how to use Blender to export, set up your materials, export your mesh after you create LODs, and then set up your Trainz asset, all using some plugins there that should make your life a little bit easier. Thanks for watching.